But yeah, so today's lecture, we're going to continue on with our discussion of topic 4. And what we start today, we're going to finish in Thursday's lecture. So the material we'll be covering today, we're going to kind of do in 2 parts. We're going to do the basics today, and then we're going to do something a little bit more advanced with that general topic on Thursday. All right, so that's our objective for this week. And that'll basically wrap up what we cover and what is testable in this course, which makes sense given that Thursday is actually the last lecture, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think that's right. What are we going to do? Look, what have we done so far in topic 4? What we've done so far in topic 4 is we introduced the securities that are specific to VC that are used in practice, right? There were 3 types of securities that we discussed: convertible preferred, participating preferred, and participating preferred with a cap, right? Those are the things that are used almost entirely in, at least in North America, right? There's a bit more variation in the rest of the world, but it's surprisingly uniform even in other countries, especially developed ones. So we know that. Then we also learned from our last lecture the exercise called waterfall analysis, which is the process you go through to understand when you have multiple rounds of securities that are issued, how they interact with each other to generate more nuanced and complicated looking payoff diagrams for these securities, so that your Series A security looks one way when it's the only security, and then it changes a little bit once you issue your Series B, right? And then everything changes again once you issue your Series C. So every time you have a new round of funding, you have to redo that waterfall analysis to understand how does the pie get divided across all these stakeholders. To me, the best practice in the world, when you want to understand the capital structure of a startup, is that you want to identify all the different stakeholders in that startup, right? So that'll include the founders, who usually own common equity. It'll include some employees that, maybe own common equity. They might own stock options. Stock options, a little bit tricky because we don't have the time to discuss it in this course, but I did give a handwritten document that talks about that, right? And then you have all the investors. You might have some angel investors. You have some VCs, the Series A VCs, the Series B, Series C. So you want to identify all these stakeholders. And what you'd like to do in a perfect world is you would like to get a payoff diagram for each of those stakeholders, so that you understand for each person, as a function of the exit value, that's the x-axis in your payoff diagram, how much of the whole exit value, X, does the different stakeholder get, right? So waterfall analysis is all about answering a pie division problem. How does the overall pie, i.e. the overall exit value, get split up across all the stakeholders, right? And we basically illustrated a procedure around answering that question. I defined it pretty much as an algorithm, right? And we illustrated it with relatively simple examples. And here's another thing: I promise we will do more examples of this type in our final review session. So my practice problems for topic 4 are all going to involve some additional waterfall analysis problems for you. So in addition to the examples that we did in class, we will be doing more in the final review. So hopefully you start to feel more comfortable with it, because waterfall analysis is definitely one of these things where practice makes perfect. You just kind of work at it, right? And I know we're running out of time in the semester, so it seems like you wish you maybe had a bit more. So we'll create a little bit more with the final review, and I'll make sure that I do in the final review session at least 2 examples of that, right? And sorry, I saw a cat, so I got a little bit distracted. Looks like a very cute cat. I really got distracted. I don't remember what I'm saying anymore. So we'll have more examples, right? And I think probably what I'll do is I'll add at least 1 more practice example that we won't do in the final review, but I'll give you guys a solution for, so that you guys can try to independently practice it if you want. and then check it with my solution. You know, it's just trying to give you guys more versus less practice. I'm not going to do something crazy on the final exam with the waterfall analysis. It's just going to be testing, like, are you okay with the basics? Sound good? So that's what we've done so far. Look, one of the net results of a waterfall analysis is you start to comprehend the financial implication of an individual VC security. What does the payoff diagram look like for your Series A security? What does it look like for your Series B security? What does it look like for your Series C security? Yada, 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 right? So it gives you an understanding of what you've got, correct? Financially. So here's the next question to ask. How do you value those securities, right? Because let's think about what we did in topic 3. In topic 3, we talked about valuation, correct? We did our DCF style stuff that was adapted to VC. We did our comparables-based stuff that was adapted to startups and VC as well. But when we did that exercise, we were valuing the whole pie, correct? We weren't coming up with the value of the Series A security versus the Series B security. We were literally valuing the entire pie, right? What we're going to be doing this week is we won't be valuing the entire pie. We will instead ask ourselves, well, the pie is composed of different pieces. There is the piece that belongs to Series A. There is the piece that belongs to Series B. And we're going to try to value each piece individually. And hopefully we understand that this is an important thing to be able to do. Because if you are the new investor who's about to buy a Series D, you care more about what is the value of the Series D security that you're buying, as opposed to what is the value of the whole company, right? When you buy a Kondo, not my family name, but the one with a C, right? When you buy a Kondo, you don't care about just what's the value of the whole building. And then you say, oh, you know, there's 200 units in the condo. I guess my thing is worth 1/200th. That's a little bit stupid if you don't live in the penthouse, right? Not all units are created equal. And so you want to know how to assign a specific value to the different heterogeneous condo units, correct? You want to do the same thing in VC because every round of security is different. And the preferred securities that the VCs buy, which I told you in class, have this feature called downside protection, correct? Like those things are definitely not worth the same as common equity, which has no downside protection. Which of the two is worth more?
Preferred.
The preferred, right? So you don't want to be the fool who looks at the person who bought the preferred for $10 a share and then blindly thinks, oh, my common equity must be worth $10 per share. No, they bought a cashew, you have a peanut. Your peanut is worth less. So if you pay cashew price for peanuts, you know, I pity the fool, right? Famous quote by a guy called Mr. T. You guys probably don't know who he is, but you can Google him. YouTube him, it'll be funnier. He has a haircut a little bit similar to yours, Mike. A little bit more narrow, kind of like a faux hawk kind of thing. Right? You don't want to make those mistakes, right? You want to understand how is every share in the capital structure different from each other so that you can assign as well as you can. None of what we do is perfect, let's be clear. But you want to make a good faith attempt to separate the cashews from the peanuts, from the macadamia nuts, from the hazelnuts. I don't know any other nuts, but like pine nuts are expensive, I think. But you want to be able to do that. And that it requires you to know something about the differences between nuts. Waterfall analysis is what allows you to figure out the differences between different securities. And how do you assign a price to the different securities? We're going to have to introduce something a little bit new, which is going to be option pricing techniques. But I'm going to do it in the way that is as simple as I can make it. And I'm going to try to make it user-friendly, where I'm not going to try to over-explain everything. I'm going to just show you a process to do it. And then once I do the process, I'm going to give you a template that helps you implement the process. Sound good? So that's what we're doing today and Thursday. So let me go ahead and share my slides. And by the way, those of you who have taken my ACF course and are familiar with what I did with static replication in that course, this will look familiar because it's the same thing. It's like a simpler version of the same thing. So yeah, does this, a little bit of an unfair advantage for some people versus others? Yeah, but it's not so complicated. So even people who are seeing it for the first time, I feel confident that you guys can get it. You guys have impressed me throughout the semester, despite all the hurdles that you guys have faced. So can everyone see my slides? Okay, perfect. So as I said, this topic is really just about, literally this whole set of slides is just about this bullet point. This other stuff here, we're not even going to have a chance to do. Okay, so this week is just this. It's security valuation as opposed to startup valuation. It's valuing, an individual nut in the mixed bowl of nuts as opposed to valuing the whole mixed bowl. Okay. So the approach we're going to take, I'm going to describe it at a high level. And if you've never seen it before, and if you've never seen option pricing, which is actually possible, depending on which version of Finance 1 you took, don't over panic yet, because I'm going to try to demystify it. But I just want to explain at a high level first, which is at the end of the day, the way we're going to value individual securities is going to be using option implied valuation. So it's going to be a mechanism for figuring out the different slices of the pie, how much are they worth? And it's a bit more complicated than saying like you have 1/8 of the pie, so your share is worth 1/8 of the whole pie, because we've already talked about valuing the whole pie. That was topic 3. So in solving our problems here, I will always take it as given that we already know the value of the whole pie. We did our topic 3 stuff already. And we're just going to the next step of valuing individual pieces of the pie. But it's not as easy as just multiplying by a fraction, which is between 0 and 1. The reason is the types of pie cutting exercises that we work with in VC are such that the size of the pie that you get, the size of your piece of the pie, depends on how big the pie is, right? If you've got downside protection, let's say you're the only preferred share, right? And you're owed 10 million and the company exits for 8 million. What percentage of the pie do you have? You have 100%, correct? Because you get everything first. But if the company exits for $1 billion, you don't own 100% of the pie. You own whatever you can convert to. Let's say that's 20%, then you probably own 20%. So far, so good? In other words, there's this complicated thing in this exercise where the percentage of the pie that you own depends on the size of the pie. And so you can't just say, oh, I'm 20% of the pie, because the percentage of the pie that you are depends on the size of the pie. And in order to solve that, it turns out that this is an option pricing exercise. And it's going to be a little bit unusual. And I'll point out the ways that the option pricing exercise is unusual as well. So in solving this, we need to make a bunch of assumptions. So that it's not as straightforward of an exercise as we would if we were, trying to figure out the value of a call option traded in financial markets, where the call option is on stock that is publicly traded. Unfortunately, it's not that easy, right? And so we need to make assumptions. So I'm going to point out the assumptions we make. What I will say is here, if you don't fully understand every nuanced detail that I mentioned, it's a little bit less mission critical to the ability to do this stuff. So if there's one part in the course where I'm okay with you not feeling 100% fully comfortable with how everything connects together, this is the part, so long as you understand the process. Usually, like in a perfect world, I like people to understand everything and know how to use it. Here, if you understand at a high level that, this is not perfect and we're making assumptions, and you kind of at least are aware of the assumptions, I view it as being okay if you don't fully understand why those assumptions are being made. it's more acceptable. It's just, you know, because of the amount of material we're trying to cover in a short amount of time. Okay. Yeah, I'm realizing as I read this, if I think of myself in the shoes of a student who's never seen option pricing, a lot of things here sound like a foreign language, maybe a Martian language. So, you know what? Rather than discussing through the slide, what I'll do is I'm actually going to discuss via example. Okay, so I'm going to try to explain the logic of our exercise visually, and then we'll relate back to what the broad assumptions and the principles are. Does that sound okay? All right. So I want to highlight the valuation process via example, and I'm going to highlight that using using the simplest example of a VC security. What we're going to be interested in doing is valuing this security here with this payoff. What is that? This is just a plain vanilla, you know, convertible preferred equity, right? With just one round of investment, right? So this is literally the simplest thing we've got. It's either that or participating preferred. Maybe participating preferred is simpler, but this is the security we want to value. Okay, and we're going to take a strategy for valuing this that is the essence of option pricing. And let me first start by telling you what the essence of option pricing is. The essence of option pricing is financially, this is what we want to buy. And I'm going to find a different way to buy the exact same thing that is composed of bite-sized pieces. So think of this. This is a fruit salad. Sorry, this may sound weird the way I'm saying it, but think you want, like, let's think, don't look at this picture and let's talk about a fruit salad. Let's say we've got a fruit salad and we look at it and there's 1 apple, 2 oranges, and 3 cherries in the fruit salad, right? One way for us to get the value of this fruit salad is to find out, well, what's the market price? I don't remember the numbers I said anymore, but like, what's the market price of an apple? What's the market price of an orange? And what's the market price of a cherry? And since our fruit salad is composed of 1 apple, 2 oranges, and 3 cherries, well, the fruit salad should be worth 1 times the price of an apple, plus 2 times the price of an orange, plus 3 times the price of a cherry. Does that kind of seem sensible? You know, in a world with no transactions costs, I mean, that makes sense, right? So this is actually what we're going to do here. We're actually going to look at this like something that we can build up with more fundamental and basic pieces that we already kind of understand, right? So how do we, by the way, the process of remaking the fruit salad, as I said, buy 1 apple, buy 2 oranges, and buy 3 cherries, and put it all together, that's given a nerdy word in finance. It's called replication. You replicate the salad with your purchase of ingredients, and you just toss it in there, right? It's just finding another way to do the same thing. And because all we care about is money in this version of the world, right? If the thing looks like, if it talks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it smells like a duck, it's a duck, right? Same thing, if it's got the same payoff diagram, it's got the same value. You see what I'm saying? Right? 2 things that are different. One is the convertible preferred. The other one is the ingredient list of stuff. It's what we call the replicating portfolio. Those 2 things must have the same value because financially they're equivalent, right? That's the underlying assumption of all option pricing in the world, full stop. And what we're doing here is an application of that. So now the question is, when you look at this payoff diagram, how do you spot an apple, an orange, and a cherry? Like, what does that mean here, right? The ingredients that we will use in in making our salad here and in replicating this payoff diagram are going to be the following basic ingredients. We are going to use the underlying asset. The underlying asset is the whole pie. It is the entire firm. If you could buy the entire firm, what would be your payoff diagram? Well, I can draw that for you. I'm going to have to stop sharing this for a second and show you guys. I'll show you guys the basic ingredients that we end up using. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Can you guys see me in big again? Yeah. So what are my fundamental ingredients? I'm just writing it down. My first one is going to be startup as a whole. So, oh, wrong one. So what are my fundamental ingredients? First one is startup as a whole. What is the payoff diagram of the startup as a whole? Well, the x-axis is the startup as a whole. It's the exit value of the whole company, correct? So the payoff diagram of the startup as a whole is like the payoff diagram y equals x, right? It's like if the startup as a whole exits for $10, the startup as a whole has exited for $10. If the startup as a whole has paid 20 bucks, the startup as a whole has paid 20. I mean, this sounds tautological because it is, right? So the startup as a whole, remember, what is a payoff diagram? A payoff diagram is startup exit value, right? Our x-axis is always for everything startup exit value. And so startup as a whole, our y-axis is always this security. What is its payoff level? And in this particular case, it's just the y equals x line. Make sense? Right? And that one's definitional. What are the other ingredients that we're going to use? We're going to use two other classes of ingredients. One is going to be call options on the startup as a whole. Call option on startup as a whole. And this is the payoff diagram of a call option. This should look like a normal call option as you've always seen it. The only thing here is just notice the underlying asset for this call option is the entire startup. It is the whole pie, right? Remember, you need to define a strike price for the underlying asset, K. You also do need to identify a maturity date on an option. So we'll say the maturity date is the exit date. When I say exit date, I mean the date that the startup exits. But you know, with a call option, if the startup as a whole is worth less than the strike price K, it pays nothing. And the moment it goes above K, for every dollar above K, you get $1 extra. This is just like, I'm sure everyone has seen the payoff diagram of a call option. This is just the payoff diagram of a call option. Are we okay so far? So the third ingredient may be a new one, but it's simple to describe. That's the good news. It's called a cash or nothing binary call. So instead of being a regular option, it's a cash or nothing binary call. Also, it's sometimes called a CNBC, not to be mistaken with the media company, but just shorthand, CNBC. So a CNBC also has a strike price, K. So again, just like the two other classes of securities, the x-axis is still the payoff of the exit value of the whole startup. We still have a strike price K. This is all happening at the exit date for the startup. And again, our y-axis now is the CNBC payoff. A CNBC, a cash or nothing binary call, gives you nothing if the exit value of the startup is less than the strike price. So by the way, that's the exact same thing as what you have with a normal call option, right? But with the CNBC, the moment you are at or equal to K as an exit value, you jump up and you get exactly $1. So if you're 1 penny above K, you get $1. If you're $1 trillion above K, you still get $1. Notice this is like a jump. A CNBC gives you a jump of $1 at K and then stays at $1 for every exit value above that. So the slope is 0 and then 0. The only thing a CNBC does is it creates a jump. Do folks have at least a general understanding of the securities I just introduced? This is our apple, our orange, and our cherry. So now I'm going to start sharing my slides a little bit. Go back to my slides pretty much. And this part is important. So if you don't understand, please ask me to explain again, or please slow me down, because this is probably the most important part of what we're going to do. Because I want to use a portfolio of Apple, which is the startup as a whole, and potentially different call options, right? When I say different call options, I mean call options with different strike prices. And potentially, although not in the first example I'll do here, potentially some CNBCs as well. So let me explain. I am going to replicate this payoff diagram from left to right. So I'm going to focus on matching things here first. And then as I progressively go to the right, I'm going to be focusing on making changes to my portfolio to match what happens at higher values of X. So how do I match this segment, which has a slope of 1 from 0 to 20? I can match that by just buying the startup as a whole, the first ingredient. You guys see what I'm saying? Because if I only bought one thing, if I only bought long the underlying, what I call the underlying in my slides is just the startup as a whole. It's the Y equals X, the first ingredient that I showed you guys on paper. Notice if I just bought this, I would be fully matched up to 20, but then I would be not matched at higher values of exit value, correct? Because my payoff diagram would just be this dashed red line. Do we agree with that statement? So obviously I'm not finished because that's not matching. Yes? So I need to make a tweak. Once I get to 20, I need to make the slope go from 1 to a slope of 0, correct? If I want to continue matching. By the way, this is the beauty of this technique. There's one. Why do I hold underlying? I hold underlying to match my initial slope. Because my initial slope is 1, I buy 1 unit of the underlying. If my initial slope was 0.5, I would buy half a unit of the underlying. If my slope was somehow 1.7, it's never going to happen. But if it was, I would buy 1.7 units of the underlying. Do you see what I'm saying? When we look at this figure when we look at the payoff diagram of a security, we just ask ourselves, what's the initial slope? If that number is theta, we buy theta units of the underlying. And that matches up until we get to this kink. Is that okay so far? And then we ask ourselves, okay, at this kink, how much does the slope change? Well, the slope goes from 1 down to 0. So it fell by 1, correct? In order to effectuate a change in slope, in this case, a change in slope at 20, all we need to do is take a position in the call option with a strike price of 20. Because our slope falls, we short the call option. Because a call option creates a change in slope. We can see it right here. You buy a call option, you make the slope go up from 0 to 1. So buying one call makes the slope go up by 1. Shorting one call makes it go down by 1. Buying 20 calls makes the slope go up by 20. Shorting 10 calls makes the slope go down by 10. And notice it doesn't screw up any of our past matching because everything up to K is 0. You take whatever you've done before and you add 0, you're still matched from before. You see what I'm saying? That's the beauty. That's the beauty. Oh, I realized that I'm on a super small screen when I just showed you that. Apologies. Doesn't matter how many times I do it. I'm still not used to it. But hopefully you guys got my point. So what do we do here? If we still hold our long position, but then we short a call with a strike price of 20, we now knock down the slope precisely at 20 because the strike price was 20. We knock it down by 1, so we make it go from 1 down to 0. Does that make sense? Well, what that means is now if we hold 2 ingredients, long underlying plus short one call at a strike price of 20, we are now matched all the way up to 60. But if we don't add anything else, we'd keep being at 0 slope thereafter. Do we agree? Notice we have another kink at 60 because the slope goes up now from 0 to 1/3. So how do we, maybe someone wants to guess for me. How would we match that jump, that kink? We add one more ingredient. What do we add? Someone can volunteer an answer.
Go long on a call.
Long a call. Which call? What's the strike price of the call?
Strike price would be 60 and you'd long 1/3 of the unit of the call.
Exactly. I mean, that's all it is. That literally is, this is the process. You just figure out where are your break points, 20 and 60. You pick the right strike price on your option. How do you figure out the quantities you hold? You just look at the magnitude of the change in slope. The slope goes up from 0 to 1/3. You need to buy 1/3 of a call option on the whole company with a strike price of 60 because the change in slope is happening at 60. So notice what I just told you is a purely visual exercise, right? And notice now we have a portfolio. Our portfolio has 3 ingredients. The underlying, by the way, the underlying, which is the startup as a whole, we know how to value that. That's what we did in topic 3, correct? So if you do a topic 3 exercise, you can get the value of the underlying. You know how to get the price of the apple. Now, how do you get the price of the orange, which is this call option? And how do you get the price of the cherry, which is this call option? To get those, we're going to use the Black-Scholes model. It's not a perfect model for dealing with startups, but it's the best we can do with an off-the-shelf technique. It's not perfect, but it's surely better than assuming a cashew is worth the same thing as a peanut, right? So even if it's not perfect, it's still going to tell me a cashew is more valuable than a peanut. So I factor some of it. So my point is the technique I'm teaching you guys today is not perfect, but it's sensible. It moves us in the right direction. Are we okay so far? So notice that what I want to say, just to repeat, and I'm sorry if I'm belaboring the point here, is we look at this payoff diagram, we identify the original slope that tells us our position in the startup as a whole, we identify the changes in slopes, and that tells us which call options we want to put in our replicating portfolio as well. And once we have this drawing, once we have the payoff diagram, getting the replicating portfolio is a purely visual exercise. Okay? Yes?
I just want to confirm, well, I want to ask you if it's an okay way of putting it. Would it be fair to say that that payoff diagram is effectively the net of your replication portfolio? The net payoff of your replication portfolio is what that payoff diagram is?
Well, I mean, it's the gross payout, and it costs a certain amount of money today. And we're going to figure out the amount that this replicating portfolio costs today by using our valuation for the whole firm using topic 3 techniques and some guesstimate of what these options would be worth if they were truly traded using the Black-Scholes model.
Yeah, what I mean and what I'm trying to get at is more so like the shorting the call option, for example, at k equals 20 would effectively have a slope of -1, right? So that I'm saying the position in the long basically offsets. On a net basis, you have zero payoff, change from value of 20 till a value of 60 because
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, okay, that's what you mean by net. Usually when people talk about a payoff diagram and they mean net, is you take this payoff diagram and you subtract the price.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you've studied derivatives before, but I want to avoid using the word net payoff because of that reason.
Got it. Yeah.
But yeah, this is like what you get, period. When you combine everything together, right? There are some assumptions that we've made here. We're saying like, this is the payoff that you're going to get. And so that can be replicated by these call options and this underline. But that's not exactly true because we know, like, look, right now the company has just raised 1 round of funding, correct? The thing is, there is a chance that it could raise another round of funding or 2 other rounds of funding or 3 other rounds of funding or go all Uber and 17 other rounds of funding. Every time there's a new round of funding, the payoff diagram changes. We talked about that last lecture, right? So when I price this payoff diagram, I am, in a very literal sense, assuming that there's going to be no future financing. Like if we wanted to model everything perfectly, we'd want to figure out, well, what's the likelihood that there's a future round of funding? And what's the likelihood that it's under these terms or those terms or those terms or those terms? You can start to see that this becomes a hot mess pretty quickly, correct? There would be just too many things to model in terms of future financing. So even though I would like to know the answer of how future financing affects my valuation, the assumption that we make, by the way, this is what gets made in practice. So I'm not just doing a silly McGill thing. This is what gets done in the real world, is that we assume no more financing. And as a result, this is what it's going to be. There's not going to be future rounds of funding that change this picture. So that's an assumption that is made in the technique I am teaching you today. And if you think, oh, wow, I don't think that's spectacular, the answer is, I agree. I agree with you, but I'm not able to solve that more complicated problem. It is not tractable. So I got to work with the cartoon because a cartoon is better than an empty sheet of paper. All right. The other thing is, in solving this problem, I'm also going to assume that I know when the exit date's going to be. Because if I want to specify a call option, I need to specify a maturity date, right? So I need to know when this payoff is occurring. But we know the payoff occurs when the company exits. Right now, I don't know exactly when the company is going to exit. So that's a bit tricky. Are they going to exit in 5 years, 4 years, 6 years? I don't really know. And that makes it tough to use the Black-Scholes formula, because the Black-Scholes formula assumes you know when this is happening. It's all happening at the maturity date of the option. And so how do we deal with that problem? Again, we deal with it cartoon style. We just assume we know what date it's going to happen. And what we'll do is we'll use the average exit date historically for a startup. Remember what I said, Series A is usually 5 years to exit, or maybe it was 6, I don't remember. I think Series A was 5, Series B was 4, Series C was 3. I'm just going to assume those numbers. So if I'm a typical Series C, I'll assume 3 years to exit. So I use the rule of thumb numbers that we introduced in topic 3. Not because I think it's perfectly realistic. It's because I'm only capable of drawing a cartoon. And that's the best cartoon I can draw. Are we okay with this so far? So like the way that I do my analysis, it literally makes those assumptions. If we want to take it super seriously, it's making unrealistic assumptions, okay? There's no tiptoeing around that. If I told you this is all realistic, I'd be lying, right? But again, welcome to the real world. We cannot model everything. And so we need to like try to reasonably cut corners so that we have, again, the idea is we want to get a cartoon that looks like it's on the right path because it's better than not drawing anything at all. It's the best we can do with reasonably, accessible techniques. We okay so far? Again, I'm going to emphasize this again, like a broken record, because before you start saying like, wow, this doesn't seem useful, let me tell you for a fact, this is what gets done in practice, right? So this is actually used in the real world, like by real world VCs, not just like MIT trained nerds like me, okay? Right, so in this curve right here, all I'm doing is I'm telling you we're making an assumption on the exit date. That's all I've added. Right, I'm assuming that that startup will exit at time T, where T were the rule of thumb numbers that I gave in part 1 of topic 3. Okay, now so far we've only talked about using call options and underlying, but I did talk about a third ingredient when I first drew stuff on a piece of paper, right? I talked about the CNBC. So the question is, why did I talk about a CNBC? Especially when most of you guys, if you haven't taken a derivatives course, have never seen that before. Like, why do I have to do that? Why am I adding complexity to your life? It's because sometimes we saw in payoff diagrams, there are jumps and drops, correct? Because of mandatory conversion. We saw that in an example at the end of our last lecture. So whenever you've got mandatory conversion that binds, that means it forces you to convert when you would not like to convert. That creates a drop in your payoff diagram. And a drop in your payoff diagram creates actually a jump in everyone else's payoff diagram. In other words, real world securities with VC, startup, they can have jumps and drops, not just changes in slope. So there are both kinks. A kink is a change in slope, and jumps. Flip side of a jump is a drop in these types of securities. So we also need to be able to replicate jumps and drops. And that's the whole point of the CNBC. If you buy 5 CNBCs at a strike price K, you create a jump of 5 at K. If you short 10 CNBCs at a strike price K, you create a drop of 10 at K. You see what I'm saying? So that is the purpose of the CNBCs, is that it helps you match visual jumps and drops that you see in your payoff diagram. So for instance, let's take this example. It's the same example as what we had before, except we add mandatory conversion at 45. So because of mandatory conversion at 45, you get this drop. Visually, I'm looking at it, and I'm not sure how big the drop is. It sure looks like it's a drop of 5. So are you guys okay with me just assuming it's a drop of 5? I'll call it a drop of 5. I think that's what it is because, it's you go from 0 to 20 by 60. So at 45, you're 3/4 of the way. 3/4 of 20 is 15. 15 versus 20 is a 5 drop. That's how I'm rationalizing it here. If that didn't make sense, don't sweat it. You just need to know how to calculate a drop given a full specification of a problem or a jump. But how would we replicate this? Well, we go, again, we're going to replicate left to right. So we go long, one underline. We go short, one call at 20. Now at 45, notice we have a drop of 5. So we go short 5 CNBCs, correct? Short 5 CNBCs at a strike price of 45. And then now we have a change in slope at this exact same point because the slope goes from 0 to alpha. So what do we need to do? Also at 45, we need to go long alpha units of the call option with strike price 45. Make sense? And then we're done. So notice now we have 4 ingredients, right? I'm going to repeat it one more time. Long 1 unit of the underlying, i.e. the startup as a whole. Short 1 call option at a strike price 20 on the startup as a whole. Short 5 CNBCs on the startup as a whole at a strike price of 45. Long alpha units of the call option on the startup as a whole with a strike price of 45. And that's it. Those are 4 ingredients in this particular case. And so if you hold those 4 raw ingredients in the quantities I just verbally described, you own the same thing as this security financially. Are we okay with this so far? So again, what I want you to recognize is the process I just described. It's an inherently visual process where you just have the discipline of remembering the 3 types of ingredients and replicating from left to right. We'll do more examples of this on Thursday, by the way, right? So we'll do some slightly more intricate versions of this problem on Thursday. My goal is to do 2 examples on Thursday. Sound good? Now I want to close the loop because so far I've just talked about replication, which is not the same thing as fully discussing valuation. Because right now we just know, to replicate, we need to buy 1 apple, 2 oranges, and 3 cherries. But if that's all you don't know the price of the salad. In order to know the price of the salad, you need to know the price of the orange, you need to know the price of the apple, and you need to know the price of the cherry. Now, the first ingredient, the price of the underlying, I already told you that we solved this in topic 3, because the whole point of topic 3 was get the value of the startup as a whole. That was the objective. So we know how to get the first ingredient. It might take a lot of work and it might be an imperfect exercise. We know it's an imperfect exercise because it's not like everything was perfect in topic 3. Let's not kid ourselves. It's a difficult thing to do. But at least we have a way to try to get a guesstimate of what the value as a whole, the value of the startup as a whole is. But what we have not discussed yet is how do you get the prices of call options and CNBCs on the startup as a whole, correct? So we need to talk about how we do that. In a perfect world, those 2 sets of securities would be traded in the market. And then all we need to do is look up the price of the security in the market. The problem is those things are not traded in the market. In fact, the startup as a whole is not traded either. That's why we have to do our topic 3 work. Does that mean this is hopeless? No. We try our best to get a guesstimate, a hypothetical sense of what the call options and the CNBCs are worth. So that's how we're going to tackle that. And the way we're going to tackle that is by using the Black-Scholes formula. The Black-Scholes formula this looks like a hot mess to most people when they see it for the first time. Okay, but here's what you need to know for the purposes of this class about the Black-Scholes formula. The Black-Scholes formula is a formula for getting the value of a call option from basic parameters of the underlying asset. In this case, the underlying asset is the value of the startup as a whole, is the startup as a whole. The Black-Scholes formula is a rigorous mathematical model that gives you a formula for the price of any call option on that underlying asset. It has inputs. The inputs are the value of the underlying asset, in this case, the value of the startup as a whole, what the strike price of the option is, what the maturity date of the option is. By the way, we know what K and T are in a given scenario, right? The K comes from the waterfall analysis. The T is our guesstimate of the exit date. And we also have a sense of what V is. V is the value of the startup as a whole, and we get it using the calculations that we discussed in topic 3. So these 3 numbers are gettable for us. The Black-Scholes model requires us to give 2 more inputs to get to know how to use the formula. We need to get an estimate of the riskless rate, but we know how to get the riskless rate. Just look at the yield curve. So this number we can get as well. So we're only left with one unknown. The final unknown that we are left with is what is the volatility of this specific startup's firm value? How much uncertainty is there in this startup's value? If we're willing to take a stand on this number, we can actually compute the Black-Scholes formula. Now, I have, as a courtesy, I'm not sure, it probably doesn't feel like a courtesy right now, because no one likes looking at it. I still remember the first time I saw this and I was like, what in the world is going on? I thought I liked math. You look at this, if it gives you a nightmare right away, just don't look at it. Do not look at it. I guess when I say do not look at it, you probably look at it more carefully, but in any case, that's a normal psychological response. You actually don't need to memorize this for this course at all. 100%, you don't need to memorize it. Because I'm going to give you guys an Excel template. It's already posted on my courses that goes and calculates this formula for you. All you need to know is how to get this number, this number, this number, this number, and this number. For instance, on the final exam for a topic 4 problem, I will give you this number straight up. I will give you this number straight up. I will give you this number straight up. And I will give you this number straight up. The only number you'll have to figure out is K by doing a waterfall analysis. And then you'll be able to use my template to get the value of the call option. I'll show you guys my Black-Scholes template shortly. All right. But for now, I just want to highlight, my point is the Black-Scholes model is a mathematically rigorous model that under a certain set of assumptions gives you a formula for the call options. It turns out it also gives you a formula for the CNBC. We almost never talk about it, but that formula is actually even easier to look at. But this formula and this formula are 100% logically consistent with each other. At a practical level, these are just 2 formulas we can use to help guesstimate what the value of the orange and the value of the cherry are in this particular context, where the orange is the call options and the cherry is the CNBCs. It gives us formulas for those 2 things. And so we use the formulas to figure out what the price of those 2 things are. And once we know the prices of the cherries, the oranges, and the apples, we're able to value the whole fruit salad, no matter what the fruit salad looks like, so long as it just uses those 3 fruits, those 3 ingredients. So let me just mention a couple of things, because I did tell you, like, I did say we need to know all of these numbers. I told you, look, to get this number, you do topic 3 calculations. To get this number, you need to do your waterfall analysis. For this, you use the rule of thumb value of T from topic 3, part 1. And for this, you just look up the riskless rate. So the only thing that's left is, how do you get this number? That's actually a little bit tricky. Because how do we usually get the volatility of something? We look at historical returns and we estimate a volatility from that, correct? I mean, that's how you've always done it for a stock, correct? Here's the problem. The underlying here is not traded. It's the startup as a whole. It's not traded every day. And so we don't have a way to use data to directly estimate this. You guys kind of get the problem here? It's like, how do we get this? So again, we can't do a perfect job, but some even nerdier academics than me have tried to answer this question. And in particular, they've done ultra nerdy stuff, and I'm not going to go into the details of the ultra nerdy stuff, but they've tried to be rigorous in trying to estimate the following. What is the average volatility of a Series A investment? What is the average volatility of a Series B investment? What is the average volatility of a Series C investment? So on and so forth. See what I'm saying? And they exploit the fact that they've got data on many Series A deals, on many Series B deals, yada, yada, to try to infer that more carefully so that they don't need daily data for any individual company. Because they assume all the Series A are kind of similar, they get an average volatility estimate out of that. So they don't use time series data on an individual asset. They use cross-sectional data across many Series A's, across many Series B's. If this sounds like Chinese to you, that's okay. All that you need to know is the punchline of this actually good faith attempt to ballpark volatility numbers, which is the following. The estimate is annual volatility for a Series A is about 120% per year. For an average Series B, it's about 100% per year. For an average Series C, it's about 80%. And for an average Series D and beyond, it's about 60%. It goes down a little bit. Maybe if you get to like the higher things like Series G, they haven't directly estimated it, or they haven't. I know the people who've done these things, so they haven't directly given me the numbers, but I guess they don't like me that much, or at all. But in any case, you know, my guess is if you were to ask me like a Series G, probably I would tell you something like 50%. But you can use those numbers as ballpark estimates of volatility. You see what I'm saying? It's not perfect, but it's better than just assuming a random number. It takes into account a life cycle of volatility, with the life cycle of volatility saying, as you become more mature, you become less volatile. And I think we can all agree that that kind of makes sense, right? It should. I mean, I think it makes sense. By the way, the average volatility of an individual stock on the NASDAQ from 2011 to 2016 was 45%. So it would be difficult to believe that like a Series G would be lower than 45%. So my ballpark of 50 sounds actually semi-legit once I see that, because it should converge to 45%, because that's when you go, you know, NASDAQ, you've gone public. Folks have any questions about this? Anyway, this is actually practical guidance. I'm giving you my justification for rules of thumb value for volatility. By the way, as a starting point, when I'm doing consulting work around valuing individual securities, the first numbers I use are exactly the numbers I've given you here. Like literally that is my first calculation. And then I ask the level up question of, do I think my specific case is a little bit riskier or a little bit less risky than average, so that I should tweak the number up or tweak the number down? I do ask myself that question, but the first calculation I do is with those numbers. I plug those into the Black-Scholes model. I'm serious. I'm not kidding. Right, so that's how you get your volatility number. So now let me do one last thing for today's lecture, which is I'm going to go back to that example that we did at the beginning. Let's actually do the one that was a little bit more complicated, which is let's value this security. And I'm going to show you how to use my Black-Scholes template to value this security. Are folks okay with that? So let me show you my Black-Scholes template. I'm going to have to tell you some more information. This is a Series A. So I'm going to use the Series A rule of thumb value for volatility, 120%. I'm just writing the information down so I don't forget it because I'm doing it for the first time here. But it's easy, so I'm not worried that I'm going to screw it up. So let's assume volatility is going to be 120%. I'm going to assume that the startup right now is worth $50 million. That's a pretty valuable Series A. So that's unrealistically high, but I'm just going to roll with it. Okay. It must be founded by someone who was really successful before to justify that valuation. Let me put it that way. It's a Series A, so let's assume time to exit is 5 years. I'm going to assume a riskless rate of 5% per year. And that's all I need as my basic information about the startup. And this is my security. So my security is a convertible preferred with mandatory conversion at 45 million. And by the way, theta here is 1/3. Okay. So given this, what's the replicating portfolio? I'm going to say it in words. The replicating portfolio is long 1 unit of entire startup. That's the first ingredient. The second unit is short 1 unit of call on entire startup with a strike price equal to 20 and T, maturity date, equals to 5 years, because I'm assuming, like a typical Series A, that it's 5 years to exit. I say typical, but maybe I should say the average as opposed to typical. And then I go short 5 CNBCs because there's a drop of 5. So short 5 units of CNBC on entire startup with a K equals 45. And again, T equals 5 years because we're assuming the payoffs happen in 5 years. And then finally, because alpha here I said is 1/3, we're going to go long 1/3 unit of call on entire startup with a strike price, again, of 45, because the slope goes from 0 to plus 1/3 exactly at 45. So notice there's 2 things happening at 45. There's a drop and a change in slope. And again, T equals 5. The maturity date is going to be the same for every ingredient in your portfolio, in your replicating portfolio. Are folks okay with what I've said verbally so far? Now what I want to do is figure out the value of the fruit salad using the Black-Scholes model. So I'm going to switch from, I'm going to stop sharing this. And now I'm going to share instead my Excel spreadsheet. Can folks see an Excel spreadsheet right now? Yes or no? Okay. Is this big enough or is this too small?
That's good.
It's okay? All right. I'm just going to show you how to use this. Every column is a different ingredient, right? So remember, we identified 4 components in our replicating portfolio. So component of replicating portfolio. The first one is entire startup. The second one is going to be call with K equals 20, T equals 5. The next one is going to be CNBC with K equals 45, 45, and T equals 5. And then the last thing is going to be call with K equals 45 and T equals 5. Again, I'm just writing it down just so visually we see what's happening. Those were the 4 ingredients that we visually identified as being the ingredients in our replicating portfolio. What did I say was the value of the whole firm? I said it in words. The whole firm is worth 50. By the way, when you use my template, the only numbers you ever want to change in this entire rectangle are the stuff in yellow. Do not change anything that is not yellow. If you do that, you are screwing the template. And if you use it in the exam, you then end up screwing yourself, which you don't want to do. So underlying price, that is the value of the startup in our example. So 50 million is what I said in words. 50. Notice the 50, when you change it in the yellow, it automatically changed every other column. That's why you don't want to change anything in this beige color, because you're screwing my formulas. Okay, I'm doing it to be as user-friendly as possible. Dividend yield, don't even sweat it. My template here is more general than a startup context. You will never need a number that is not 0 here. You will never, ever, ever need that. It is always 0. Volatility, I said, is 120%, because that's the average number for a Series A. 120% means 1.2. So far, so good? Riskless rate, I said, was 5. Oh, I'm going to need to update my template. So do not download it from my courses yet. Download it at any time after 7 p.m. on Tuesday, December 1, 2020, because I will change it. Because notice when I change this number, it didn't change everything here. It should have. So this number should be this. Oh, okay. I don't know. I always blame my son when there's an error in my template, which is probably because he jumped on my face while I was doing this. He will hate me when he is older and ever stumbles on this. It's probably a mistake. That's very myopic of me. So change the 5%. Oh, there's another problem here too. Gonna go. There we go. So I just need to update this today. I will update it after class, okay? As I said, by 7 p.m. Tuesday, December 1, 2020, what is on my courses will be right. I'm just gonna change it. It's gonna be an easy switch. Are we okay with this so far? Time maturity is the anticipated exit date, 5. Oh, that one good. That one, you know, my son didn't jump on my face when I set that part up. So far, so good. When you have the entire startup, the number you put here is irrelevant. Whatever, put any number you want. It does not matter. So I'll just leave it at 4. Okay. But for everything else, you want to use the right K. So K equals 20, K equals 45, K equals 45, because those are the strike prices. So 20, 45, and 45. Do folks understand the number entering process here now? Pretty user-friendly, right? You'll notice I'm not using component 5, 6, 7, and 8 here because I only have 4 components in my replicating portfolio. Make sense? Now, the only numbers I need to pay attention to as output are the red things. Think of this. This defines my catalog. And this is the catalog prices. So if you remember, our replicating portfolio, we held 1 unit of the whole company because our initial slope is 1. And then we hold -1 unit because -1 because it's short. A short is a negative position. So we held short 1 unit of the call. That means -1. Then we went short 5 units of the CNBC because we had a drop of 5. And then we went long 1/3 of a unit of the final call option. Does this ring a bell to our replicating portfolio from before? Now, we are ready for our final step to get a value of this portfolio. Here's the way you read this. Now, pay close attention to what I'm about to say. Okay? We have 1 unit of the entire startup. That means 1 unit of the underlying, the first row in red is the underlying price. The second row is a bond. You don't ever need to think about the bond, okay? That's for other non-VC purposes. Call option is this. Put option is this. You will never need to use the put. We only need to use calls and CNBCs. This is the prices of CNBCs. This is the this is the prices of calls, and this is the price of CNBCs. So here we have so the way you want to think about this is the price of a shopping cart. We need to buy one of the underlying plus minus one of the call option, the call option, plus minus 5 of the CNBC, plus 1/3 of the call option. It's just going to the checkout line when you go shopping. That's all we're doing. It's like, how do you look at your receipt. How did you get the final price? It was price times quantity plus price times quantity plus price times quantity, yada, yada, right? That's what we're going to do here. Price times quantity plus, this is a call option, so I look for the price of a call. Call. Price times quantity plus price of a CNBC. So price times quantity plus finally, the last one is a call option. So price times quantity. Does that make sense to people? So look, the thing to get comfortable is in the red space, which cell do you highlight? You highlight the cell that is properly labeled in your components for the replicating portfolio, right? And then you need to keep track of the quantities. But now once you do this calculation, again, this is just a shopping cart. It is the things you've done ever since you've been given an allowance and had to spend your own money, right? It's all like mathematically, it's nothing more than that. The only complexity is you want to learn to navigate my template. Navigating my template is like the cheap way of knowing how to use the Black-Scholes model. And it's good enough for our class. So now I push enter and I have a number. My number is 18.46. This tells me that this security is worth right now, if we believe the assumptions we made here, our best guess is that it is worth 18.46 million. Right? 18.46, the whole company is worth 50. So we're talking about almost 37% of the firm value is this specific security. Folks have any questions about this? I know if you are seeing this for the first time, it probably feels overwhelming. Okay, if you feel that way, that is normal, right? That is why our next lecture, we will do more examples of this. That is the only thing we do next lecture, is we do more examples of this so that you feel a little bit more practiced on starting from a payoff diagram, doing the replication step, and doing the Black-Scholes step like this. So those steps 2 and 3, we're going to do at least 2 times again next lecture, so that my goal is to help you guys digest a little bit. Okay? Because again, the first time you see it, if you have never seen option pricing, absolutely, it's a mouthful. That is normal. Right? And I wish the semester was a little bit longer so that we could do it a little bit more slowly. Right? But tis the way it is. So we're gonna, I think it'll be okay. And again, as I said, we'll do even more practice in the practice final, right? So I hope that you'll feel like rehearsed on it, right? And I'm not going to give you guys a batshit crazy final exam problem that like is so complex that you trip left and right. I'm going to keep the problem on the final relatively simple. And you guys will have a feel of that when you look at the practice final stuff that I do. Okay? And as I said, I will announce the timing of the practice final session or the final review session I'll announce that via email to the whole class soon, very soon, in the next, let's call it before our next lecture. Sound good? All right, that's all I wanted to do for today. I know, again, some of you a little bit disoriented right now, especially if you're a little bit worried when you see something like Black-Scholes. That's a normal reaction. Again, what I'll say is don't fear Black-Scholes, because if you are comfortable with my template, you don't need to know anything more about Black-Scholes than using my template. This course is not a derivatives course, so I'm not going to test you on Black-Scholes. I just want you to be able to use the template and to understand the logic of replication and why the valuation kind of makes sense. And I think that example of a fruit salad gives you guys at least some high-level context on what's actually happening here. Okay? So we will continue doing more examples of this in 2 days. In the meantime, I hope you guys continue to do okay. And yeah, again, practice makes perfect. We'll do some more practice, okay? So I hope everyone is well, and I hope everyone has a good evening.